Everybody in the industry is breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. At the end of the day, do we like the deal 100%? I don't think anybody would say yes, but I think what we do have is we have an agreement that's in place. We know what the parameters of the agreement are. We know what the safeguards are, if you want to call them that, if there are 232 tariffs. And we live to fight another day. Given the circumstances, that's the best we could have achieved out of the discussions. At the end of the day, fundamentally, the big picture, looking at the prospect of 232 tariffs on the automotive industry, it would have decimated the industry. And factories, I think it wouldn't have been very long that they could have kept them running, with an extra 25% hit on top of the factory cost of the vehicle. I was up in Ottawa just before the deal was done, and I was talking with the chief negotiator, and I sort of said to him, well, what do I know? But it seems to me, if we give a little bit on dairy and they give a little bit on the Chapter 19, everybody can declare that they've won and we can move forward. Am I being too simplistic? And I sort of got a smile. It was pretty unsettling for everybody, because I think if you look at, especially down in the US, nobody was asking for a redone NAFTA. Nobody was asking for tariffs on automobiles. The impacts are going to be felt differently by different companies, because really, from the discussions we've had, the U.S. government was really principally considering the interests of about 5 or 6 automakers, and that was about it. Principally the Detroit-based automakers, followed by Honda and Toyota, followed by Nissan, and substantially they didn't really care that much about everybody else. So I think those in the everybody else category, we're going to have a bit more of a challenge, I think, meeting the revised rules of origin and what have you. So it's not going to be an easy task by any means, but I think the federal government did work out some mechanisms with the U.S. to provide for those companies to sort of build their way over a more extended time period into reaching the content requirements necessary to meet the provisions of the agreement. I think TD put out some studies that were looking at what would be the implications of a 25% tariff on imported vehicles, and not only the tariff on imported vehicles from Canada, but also if Canada retaliated in a like-minded way. I think certainly for all the manufacturers here, the retaliatory measures weren't as much of a concern as just the 25% initial tariffs. So if you look at the retaliatory tariffs, if they were like for like on autos, then it adds sort of insult to injury. But the real threat was a 25% tariffs on vehicles exported to the U.S., because 85% of the production, about 1.8 million vehicles per year, end up going to the U.S. Those production facilities, doesn't matter who they are in Canada, aren't going to survive. It would take a significant amount of time to try and figure out where else you might be able to place those vehicles in the world if there was a home for them, because historically, all those production facilities were set up in Canada in the first place to serve just the U.S. market, were never designed to sort of look beyond Canada at other markets. I think that's the thing that's been underscored both at the political level, and I think to a certain extent maybe within industry as well, that we are really, or have really, been beholden to one market. And I have to give the Canadian government credit. They were very good at briefing industry stakeholders after the particular session, and then also briefing stakeholders from other countries as well, because I think sometimes our U.S. colleagues were finding out more what was going on from our negotiators than they were from their own team. Well, somebody described it a little bit, I guess, as the rope-a-dope between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. Ali just sort of took the punishment and then came out at the end and got the job done. And I think that's the case with our government as well. So they kept their head down. They negotiated as best they could. I think some might say, well, they spoke up perhaps at times maybe inappropriately, but I think at the end of the day, you do have to say something. You do have to stand up for yourself as a sovereign nation. And from what I've read, the public opinion seems to be supportive of the fact that we just didn't fold like a cheap suitcase at the first opportunity. But I think in the U.S., it was hard for even the Detroit-based companies to get the ear of the officials. And for my counterparts in the States, it was virtually impossible, because they weren't considered trusted advisors. There were really only 2 companies in the United States that were considered trusted advisors, and at least in the auto manufacturing side, and that was Ford and General Motors. So it's hard to make public policy, if you will, trade agreement on the opinion of two companies. And it filters all the way down the food chain. The cost of vehicles becomes more expensive across the board. Usually when price of things go up, people don't purchase as many. So we talked earlier about sales levels dropping off to maybe 2008, 2009 levels. And then you talk about the ripples through the economy as well of all the other jobs that depend on vehicle manufacturing, distribution in Canada, and being impacted by that as well. So it's not something that you can say, well, it's an isolated situation. It's just the auto industry, and just the auto industry is a pretty big chunk of the national economy. I think the challenge, though, is that the global supply chains have been, constructed the way that they've been constructed for, kind of lowest cost, maximum efficiency. So, we've sort of thrown out another, wrench sort of into that system, and it's causing everybody to have to relook at how they do things. So it's not as efficient as it was, and maybe not as cost effective as it was. If you looked at the media, NAFTA redo certainly got more airplay in Canada than it did in the US, and I think your average American probably doesn't really know what NAFTA is, and maybe doesn't really care all that much. It wasn't really big news for them. Stakes were always so much higher for Canadians than they were for Americans, but I think for Canadians it was a major issue. I don't think that everybody fully appreciates how important the automotive industry is to the Canadian economy and how vulnerable, I guess, we were to the vagaries of the President's own sort of desire to see a renewed agreement that benefited America more. Nobody, I think, really knew where it was going to land, and everybody had a hope that cooler, saner heads were going to prevail and we were actually going to get a deal done. And, fortunately, that's what happened.